so much for joining today. I'm really pleased to be opening Day 2's session in what I hope you will find an exciting and thought-provoking discussion of professionalising EDI and Athena Swan practitioners. So thank you, Pavel, for the introductions of the panel today. As Pavel said, my name is Eleanor McDavis. My pronouns are she, they, so I'm happy for you to use either. And I am the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Queen Mary University of London. And I'm joined by Claire, Hann here, and Jennifer Chapin is joining us remotely. So before we delve into today's subject matter, I'd like to start with a caption of the venue and us as a panel. So I've devised this with the input and support of both Claire and Jennifer. So a description. We are in a T-shaped room with arched ceilings and sat at the front together on a long table with one panellist joining remotely behind us on a screen are the panel. The chair, Eleanor, is a white woman in her 30s with short red hair. Claire is a white woman in her 40s with glasses and curly brown hair. And Jennifer, who is joining remotely, is a white woman in her 30s with chin-length blonde hair. So I make these descriptions for a couple of reasons. Firstly, to support in creating a more equitable experience for blind and visually impaired people who might be attending today. Secondly, to provide visual information for those attending online who might not have access to the audio aspects of this session, to the visual aspects of this session. And finally, to highlight the lack of diversity in terms of gender and ethnicity on the panel. So, while we might be diverse in many ways, and our personal characteristics, individual characteristics, have absolutely shaped us as individuals and shaped us as EDI practitioners, that's exactly what they are. They are our experiences. So we know that in the UK, certainly within the UK context, but probably within other Eurocentric societies, Athena Swan and gendered interventions have particularly benefited white women. So as we move forward with our conversations today, I hope we can all consider how, as individuals and how, as organisations, we listen and learn from the skills and experiences of practitioners from minoritized groups. So I will step down from my soapbox and I will bring us back to the main topic at hand, which is professionalising EDI and Athena Swan practitioners. So I was asked to chair today in my role as co-chair of the Athena Swan, the Russell Group Athena Swan Practitioners Working Group, which I get is a very wordy name, but it describes us very aptly. So in 2020, myself and colleagues at UCL, Professor Sarah Mole and Kevin Cortinio, established the group to create a space for practitioners to meet, and predominantly it was to meet, discuss, and feedback constructively on the UK's transformed Athena Swan Charter. And the rationale for operating within the context of the Russell Group was the commonality of being world-class, research-intensive universities, and that as a collective we held over 50% of the UK Athena Swan Awards. Now we meet roughly every other month, and while the Transform Charter is often a topic for discussion, we actually tend to focus on challenges, barriers and opportunities that we face within our roles as practitioners, both inside and outside our institutions. Even within our small remit as practitioners with responsibilities for Athena Swan, I am absolutely amazed at the breadth of skills that we have. So we're technical specialists, we're project managers, data analysts, policy writers, coaches, mentors. We turn theory into practice, and we actually manage in every possible direction you can imagine. We really are catalysts for change. So while between us our transferable skills are insurmountable, I actually think the thing that binds us together is wanting to drive meaningful change that is based on clear evidence. And that's what the Athena Swan framework provides us. So in preparing to today, speaking to Claire and speaking to Jennifer and colleagues within the Russell Group Practitioners Network, I'm still questioning how we can professionalise our work in an equitable way without gatekeeping, or whether we even should. But I'm going to stop there, and perhaps we'll circle back to some of these thoughts in Claire and Jennifer's sections and in our questions. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Jennifer, who will be joining us on the screen, who will be looking at the broader context, and then over to Claire to look at the topic within a more localised context before some questions, and then handing over to you all for a discussion section. So without further ado, Jennifer, do you want to?
Yes. Hope everyone can hear me. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, all good here.
Great, perfect. Okay, excellent. Really sorry I couldn't be there with you today, everybody. I had planned to be there with you until yesterday when my son came down with a fever. So for everyone's benefit, and as well for my son's, I'm going to stay at home today, but really sad to not be there with you in person. In any case, in having, thinking about this and talking with Eleanor and talking with Claire, the first thing I wanted to do was do a bit of Googling and understand if anything like this exists in other sectors, in other parts of the world. A very quick Google search actually made me find a couple of things. So something called the Equality and Diversity UK Practitioners Network, which I'd never heard of before. They apparently offer quite a lot of training and support for those working in universities, colleges, schools, nurseries, public sector organizations, but they don't offer any training that gives you a credential. There's also quite a lot of training that takes place, particularly in the private sector, particularly in sort of finance and insurance that I'm aware of, 5-day EDI foundation courses. But there's not a lot. So it doesn't seem like anything, does exist, maybe that we're not aware of. You never know, someone might be cooking it up somewhere, but I don't know of it right now. So I asked myself, similar to Eleanor, whether something should exist. Do we need a credential? What would the benefit be? Why would somebody like me find the time to do it, to work towards it? Would it be about incentivizing my time working on EDI? Would it be about, foundational skill building, understanding, what best practice looks like? I used to work up until a few months ago in international development, working to support gender equality there. Only recently they developed something very similar in that sector called the Gender Pro Credential. And it's hosted by the Global Women's Institute at George Washington University. It was a sort of multidisciplinary panel of people who came together to work on building a program that would support gender equality professionals in that field to have a sort of baseline knowledge of skills. It's a self-study credential, and you can take the exam for free, which I thought was very interesting. So anybody has access to it. They have a list of resources. You can, in your own time, do your own studying and then take the exam for free. However, they do offer a training course if you do want to pay to have sort of proper foundational training. So thinking about myself, what would I be looking for if I was to do something like this? I really feel like I'd want to have some foundational knowledge, probably context specific as well, up-to-date evidence on how change happens when it comes to gender equality and other areas of inclusion. But also, I think really importantly, it's often about having access to a community of practice or a support network, professional network. You're building your network, but you're also having access to people who perhaps are going through something quite similar to you, and you can bounce ideas off of. In particular, I really feel that one area where there could be some thought towards, some type of foundational certificate or knowledge really is in, from my perspective, change management and organizational change for equality, diversity, and inclusion. I don't think we maybe spend as much time as we'd like to, as we could, thinking about how change happens within a department, there's a lot of knowledge that exists around change management, around frameworks, not so much in higher education, but certainly a lot of other fields. And from my perspective, this is so central to how inequalities get tackled. We really need to understand, in our jobs, what the pathway is of change, especially with your Athena Swan application. You're setting a sort of action plan for 5 years. And what you really want to know is, are you doing the right actions to slowly change the culture within your department or your university? But also, what do you do when you hit barriers? And, what is the evidence for your actions? Are you picking the right actions that actually have a sort of bulk of evidence that exists around the world for the fact that they do create change? There are some frameworks that exist to do this type of work. I mean, I've used something called the Gender at Work framework in the past. I particularly liked it because they used 4 sort of areas, 4 categories that they looked at. So the first was access to resources. Who in the organization has access to resources? What are the formal rules and policies? What's the consciousness of staff on gender issues? But they really particularly focused on the 4th one, which was internal culture and deep structures. And when they looked at that, they said this is about accepting women's leadership. Does the organization own and acknowledge its own gender issues? Is there acceptance that there is a need to balance work and family and that the organization should provide for that? And is there a capacity and openness to dialogue when issues do occur? And from my perspective, this is really the crux of the Transform Charter, actually, for Athena Swan, is we need to understand, how to crack this nut. This is the hardest nut to crack. What do we do in this particular circumstance? Maybe just lastly, because I didn't want to take up too much time, but in my previous life, working with many different women and men in lots of places around the world, working with those university settings, research institutes, academics and researchers who wanted to address the gender inequalities that they felt existed in their setting. I felt that in most instances, they would tell me that they were often quite alone, actually. So usually it was one person starting to bang the drum, to do some advocacy work. And then slowly that built to be a sort of larger group of people. But what they really wanted when we worked together was to have access to somebody who was an expert or could provide them with some real concrete actions for how to move forward, but that they would actually do the work. And then they also wanted some recognition of the work that they did, and really some acknowledgement that it does take a lot of time and a lot of energy, and that they can't be full-time researcher and then also be doing this at the same time, which I think we all understand and realize. And then most importantly, they really wanted access to some type of community of practice or network of people, especially when you are doing this type of equality and diversity and inclusion work. You're often the only person. And so having access to others who are going through the same situation, I think, is really important. I think I'll leave my thoughts there, though, and hand it back to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Some really great reflections on what would you want as a practitioner, and particularly around achieving change management, which is an absolutely important, very important point made there by Jennifer. Claire.
Sure, thank you, Eleanor. Well, in my mind, there's 2 aspects of professionalisation. The first one is professional development, so gaining the skills and training that you need to do your job well, and being recognised for that as well, with some form of accreditation or qualification perhaps. And the second one, I think, the second aspect of professionalisation is being part of a group of fellow professionals. So learning from each other, supporting each other, feeling that you're part of that broader effort to promote EDI. So what I'm going to do in my few minutes now is just to offer you a case study of what's happening here at the University of Oxford. And I'm going to talk briefly about why we might need professionalisation and how we might go about it at this local level. So I've been talking to EDI practitioners in Oxford for a while now about professional development, or the lack of it, I guess. And they've identified a number of challenges, actually, that are associated with this lack of professionalisation. So the first challenge that came up was the inconsistency that exists across the university and the wider higher education sector as to what an EDI role is and what it should involve. As Eleanor alluded to, as EDI practitioners, we're expected to do an awful lot of different things. It ranges across HR, data analysis and research, project management, change management, monitoring and evaluation. It can feel a bit like we're kind of a jack of all trades when we're working in this kind of a role. And I know from my own experience, I feel like I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I don't feel I have expertise in any specific area. And that can be kind of frustrating and can sort of hinder your career development sometimes. The second point is that EDI roles can be undervalued. I think that what we're expected to do as EDI practitioners, whether that's influencing senior leaders, managing and implementing culture change, those kind of things are really quite high-level roles. And often the people that work in those roles are paid at relatively low grades, or their status within their institution is not as high as perhaps it could be. And I think that without that kind of professional status, it's going to make it even harder for us to make the case for EDI. Already, some people see it as a kind of an add-on or even an inconvenience. But if we can have that legitimacy of being professionals with a professional accreditation, I think that can just help us in that endeavour. The third point that people made was that there's no obvious career path for EDI practitioners. Often we are a team of one. I know I'm quite amused sometimes when people email me and say, "Dear team," I think, well, that'll be me then. I mean, many of us are just on our own, or we're perhaps added on to an HR team maybe, but there's not that obvious career route through for an EDI practitioner. I would add the caveat that I think that may be changing, because I'm noticing a lot of organisations are expanding their EDI teams, their EDI function. So there may be in the future more opportunities for people to progress within the field. And the final point that came up was that there is a lack of induction for new EDI staff. Unlike in some professions like HR or finance, where you'd come into the role and you'd be given a list of the training courses you need to take, the knowledge you need to acquire, it's not really like that with EDI, certainly not from mine and my colleagues' experience. Often we're learning on the job, or frankly by trial and error. That's what I've often found is the way I've had to go. So those are some of the challenges associated with this lack of professionalisation. I also talked to staff about what they felt were the skills they needed to work as an EDI practitioner, and where they felt they needed to learn more, where the skills gaps were. So some of the things that came up were data analysis, and that's not just how to use Excel, but how to meaningfully analyse and understand the data that you need for your Athena Swan application or your EDI action plan. Another one that's been mentioned already, influencing and managing change. So really getting a sense of what are the organisational structures within which we're working, and how can we start to make a change and influence that change at the highest level. Another one, policy development, how to write a robust policy, how to influence policy, that came up as well. Communications, I think that's a really critical skill for EDI practitioners, for all of us. We need to engage with colleagues at all levels and learn how to communicate effectively with them. And finally, not surprisingly, perhaps in a university, people mentioned knowledge of the literature and research related to EDI as being something that they would like to know more about. So these points were borne out actually by a survey that I did towards the end of last year of people that worked in EDI in Oxford. That was not just practitioners, but also academic leads who were responsible for EDI, HR professionals, others that are involved. And I asked them a question: which areas would you like to know more about or develop more expertise in? And interestingly, the top areas were evaluation and monitoring of EDI activities. More than 80% of people felt they needed more support in that area. About 3/4 of people said that they would like to know more about managing change and influencing others, so that came up again. And then over half of people felt that they needed more professional development when it came to developing EDI action plans, EDI policy and legislation, and knowledge of that literature related to EDI. So we've got these challenges, we've got these skills gaps evident in Oxford anyway. How can we address this? Well, I'm quite excited that I'm involved now in a project that we're calling the EDI Knowledge Hub, and that's all about sharing knowledge and good practice with people involved in EDI across Oxford. So improving the communication about EDI, bringing people together and offering them more support, because as I mentioned, it can be an isolating role. So it's about connecting people and bringing them together. We've done a number of things. We're going to be launching a website, which will be a kind of one-stop shop for all things EDI, so toolkits, guidance, advice, research related to EDI, all in one place. I've got a newsletter which I send out regularly to people in Oxford about EDI, and there's a pretty active Microsoft Teams group of EDI people as well, which has got some good engagement. And what I'd really like to do as a next step is to develop a community of practice for EDI staff in Oxford. And the definition of a community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or passion for something that they do. I think we can all agree that as EDI facilitators we do have that. And they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So it's about that learning and interaction. And I'm trying to start promoting that in Oxford. I've been running some events, bringing people together to talk about issues of common concern and to learn from others who've been there and done that before. And I'm really hoping that we can create this thriving community of practice, building on the networks and connections and the expertise that we have in the university to make people feel they're really part of that wider community. So I'll stop there, thank you.
A lot of what you were saying about the experiences in Oxford, obviously, well, they absolutely resonate with my own experiences, and I'm sure with many of you here today. And as you were talking, I was thinking about actually what is an EDI role? Like, can it be quantified? Can we put it in boxes? Is there a difference between an EDI practitioner with a remit for Athena Swan, and specifically Athena Swan practitioners? So maybe that's something for us to discuss at our tables in a few moments. So you'll see in front of you, we've now got time for some table discussions around professionalising EDI and Athena Swan practitioners. So you've got some sheets of paper on your table. It would be great for you to have an opportunity to go through those and make some bullet points about your own thoughts, your own experiences. For those of you who are joining online, having an opportunity to think through those reflections yourself, and those will be collected for you. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Claire for your thoughts and experiences about Oxford, and for Jennifer, who joined us remotely today. So yeah, thank you both.